the more diversity of approaches within the department to go exercise this and see, do we have what we actually need, and how do we leverage that R&D to do this? Here, I'll give you a real example that has nothing to do with defense for a second. We built the Operation Warp Speed supply chain in 5 weeks from a complete dead start during a national crisis. But I could only do that in 5 weeks because 2 years earlier, in oil and gas production, I had the original R&D stimulus to build this very sophisticated supply chain digital twin modeling infrastructure to optimize hydrocarbon production. So being able to take in these diverse stimulus from 50 different industries plus government means that the government, the whole nation, got to benefit from that. And I think there are countless examples. That is the story of commercial software.
Well, that's also the beauty of, yes, the story of commercial software, but the beauty of transferability, right? I think it's the unshackling this myopic, like high vertical integration view of, okay, I've got this elegant piece of software. It does a thing. It stays here and only does that thing. Whereas if you're taking that horizontal view, there is so much additive and just accretive value that can be derived from a single software solution as it's transferred into different contexts or exposed to data.
This is All Quiet on the Second Front, a podcast where boring conversations around defense tech and national security come to die. Join me, Tyler Sweatt, and my Second Front comrades as we dismantle the mundane and cut through the bureaucratic BS to demystify the world of defense tech. But be warned, this is not a typical government podcast. Ready to get weird?
All right, what's up, everybody? I'm your host, Tyler Sweatt. Welcome to another episode of All Quiet on the Second Front, the podcast where boring defense talk goes to die. We're going back to the beginning here. Some would say to the first breakfast, and really excited to bring longtime friend, someone I've admired for quite a while, someone I think all of us have tracked the trajectory of Palantir as they've grown throughout the market and blazed a lot of the how do disruptive companies come in. So excited to welcome Shyam. Been there almost the entire time now? So
Almost, yeah, just over 18 years. Lucky number 13 for me.
That's it, man. Thanks for coming by, brother. Really
Thanks
excited
for
to have
having
you on
me.
the show. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
So I've had the benefit of, getting to spend some time with you, know your background, know your story, but for the benefit of, the folks who might not, kind of who are you, what's your background, the Palantir story, and sort of what you guys are working on now, and then we'll get into it, brother.
Yeah, I joined Palantir almost 18 years ago as the 13th employee at a period of time where we really aspired just to solve a handful of problems for a handful of institutions in the intel community. And of course, the company's become something much bigger than that. Half of what we do now is in the commercial world, really what I call software-defined production, helping Chrysler and BMW and Airbus and great American manufacturing companies reindustrialize, and the other 50% in government, helping people close kill chains, really delivering an AI-enabled operating system for the warfighter.
So as you guys look, and I fought the urge with the Airbus reference to make a Boeing joke and just be like, hey, some free work over here. As you've seen over the course of those 18 years, right? I want to sort of set the stage on, post 9/11, kind of GWAT, everybody's got a myopic focus. We've got a common enemy, despite sort of some of the views on different aspects of GWAT, like there was a point target, there was a unified effort. We were making, with Joint ID Defeat Organization, COIC, we were finding ways to optimize procurement, to get colorless money, to accelerate deployment. How have you seen over the 18 years that, maybe ebb and flow, and kind of what's your take on where we are now as we look to the future, potentially a near peer sort of clear and present geopolitical threat?
Well, I think we've come a huge way from those early days where I think the intel community had a front door through Incutel. The Department of Defense had no front doors, no side doors. Today, now everything's open. And I love that embracing innovation, leaning into it, disrupting itself. On the other hand, I think we may have forgotten one of the quintessential lessons of that period, which is that leadership matters. How did we do this special procurement? Who came up with these ideas? Who stuck their neck out? And kind of lionizing. I think there's an opportunity here to really remember that we're all defense innovators It has always been a hard road. You've always had to fight the bureaucracy. And some of that is a little bit of self-therapy, understanding the road will be hard. Whether it's Rickover and building the nuclear navy. I think Zumwalt said Rickover is one of the top three enemies, along with the Soviets, of the Navy. So, I think these disruptors are going to have a hard time. And this disruptive community coming together and understanding what we're going after, finding the leaders that we can back, and the leadership within us to drive the department forward.
Yeah, I
By the
remember
way,
the
as a side, that is the thing I'm most excited about with something like Replicator. You look
yep.
at DepSecDev Hicks, she has stuck her neck out there and said, we are doing this. And, there's a lot of people who want to sideswipe here or there. We're not involved with the initiative at all, but I think it's amazing. We need more people standing up and charging the department forward in ways like that.
Well, I think that's one of the things, because you remember when it first launched, there were a bunch of folks who were like, oh, it's another just like, named initiative that's going to go nowhere. I think as you sort of peel it back, and if you just asked how a few times, you'd be like, well, hey, DepSecDef wants to push us into low-cost, attritable swarm capability as fast as possible. Path one, and just go chop wood in the Pentagon for like 3 years and get it on a quad chart and get it through some board. And then in 8 years, we field it. Or path two, she says, F it, sends it, tells the news we're doing it, lights a couple executive officers' asses on fire and sends them out to go figure it out. And now all of a sudden we're reprogramming. What was there, a 200 hold in the NDAA for that last year? I think that's one of those things people forget is you can't really force it through the process. You've got to just come over it, or you've got to go around it.
Yeah, one of the things I say is like process has to serve the principle. Like the process has to serve the content. And sometimes this process, it just takes on a life of its own. It survives multiple different principles. It was the right process 10 years ago. It's not right anymore. And so, how do you continually rebuild, reconstruct these things to serve its purpose? And we got to just measure those outcomes. Like what does winning look like? What is the primacy of winning?
Yeah, and I think the what does winning look like, and what are the behaviors, right? And like I spent a bunch of time working at Toffler Associates, like under Alan Heidi Toffler, and thinking about, first wave, second wave, third wave. And it's really easy to be like, hey, the building is still in the industrial age. But I was talking with Steve Blank the other day, right? And talking about all sort of these innovation entrepreneurial mindset. And you take away a bunch of, the jargon, whether it's DoD or whether it's, from B school, and it's intellectual sort of agility and the scientific method, and a little bit to your point on leadership. It's leaders creating that, safe space is like a way overused term, but that safe space for folks to iterate super fast. And I mean, that's where IED Task Force became JIDO, right? It was an 05 action officer, Ernie Benner, who went up there and she made a pitch, got like 100x more money than he thought he was going to get, came back to General Hotel and was like, we got a thing. But he had the space, and they'd let him push and iterate on it. And the task force became something. My question to you is sort of, given that what we're looking for and that mental agility, that fearlessness or courageousness from leaders, where do we see that in software? Like, do you see that in department, or where do we need it, I guess?
One of the great American strengths in the present moment is software. 86% of all tech market cap is American market cap. America is so good at software that we almost underestimate how good we are at it. Think about the fact that there are 0 Indian or Chinese enterprise software companies that are competitive on the global stage. So that tells you that software is not just about IQ. Otherwise, you'd expect some sort of distribution relative to population. It tells you there's something very cultural about it. And I think that culture comes from Bob Noyce, the co-founder of Intel, the co-inventor of the transistor. And Bob Noyce was an Iowan. So there is this caricature in Silicon Valley where maybe it came from Israel or India. And, no, really, we did import the culture to Silicon Valley. We imported it from Iowa. It's deeply rooted in Midwestern values, a willingness to play positive-sum games. Bob Noyce coined the term open door policy. And I think that also explains why it's so hard for other countries to copy. People like their culture. They're committed to their culture. So you can come and be a tourist in Palo Alto and you can see Stanford and think maybe it's the research university. You can see Sand Hill Road and think maybe it's the venture capital, but it's actually something much deeper that you're going to have a very hard time replicating. So when I think about the present moment, we have exceptionalism in America in software. It's not evenly distributed. I think when GE tried to reinvent themselves as a software company with Predix, you can't just hire 5,000 software engineers in the Bay Area and become a software company. There's something more to it. But as we think about the strength of our nation, the idea that our national security is supposed to feed American prosperity, I think it's incumbent on the software literate community within America to help reinvent the industrial base, not just the defense industrial base, the American industrial base, to meet this present moment when our greatest competitor is now the world's best at mass production. What we were at the dawn of World War II, now we find in our competitors. And, as a David in this story, we're going to need a software slingshot to beat Goliath.
How do you see the department getting into the mindset to understand how to harness it? Because I think there's multiple parts. If you just sort of like disaggregate that, right? You've got the understanding of like the lever that software can provide, right? The ability to have, you alluded to it earlier with software defined production. There's all of these different configs where it's no longer the false dichotomy of is it a software or hardware problem? Is this a people or a tech problem? It's sort of a yes answer. So how do you get an understanding there? How do you get an understanding in the department of an ability to harness that? Because where the department, I think the government has this opportunity is to put their finger on the scale from a market standpoint and really use the private capital that's all sort of around the table right now, trying to get in and help, and to sort of direct that at a target and get lever and effectively, increase their budget at no cost to them by leveraging the market. Are you seeing progress there? Like what has you optimistic or pessimistic about the ability of the government to sort of wrap its arms around that?
The things that have me optimistic, if we look something like Army's Titan, the tactical ground station, they really viewed that as a software first acquisition. So yes, it is a truck on wheels that communicates with space and beyond the line of sight sensing. But actually much more important to them was the software that was going to enable and close that kill chain. And they put that at the heart of what they were actually focused on. So I see the increasing recognition of the primacy of software and the differentiated capabilities to win. The thing that still has me a little concerned is that we don't quite, I think one of the brutal things about software is that is extraordinarily expensive to build. You want to have as broad of an R&D base as possible to amortize that expense against. And not only because it's expensive, but also because of the varied stimulus you get. You don't want to be the sole customer who has to think of all of the good ideas and all of the roadmap. You want to be able to spread out some of that pain and maybe have other customers anticipate your needs before you even realize it and just be the recipient of that value. And so that is the tech business model, which is that you gain a huge amount of leverage on your fixed costs and the R&D that you're doing by having many customers to do it with. So it results in higher gross margin at the expense of a huge startup fixed cost and the risk of getting there. The historical government business model is built around the idea that, look, we have exquisite needs. We're probably the only buyer for what we're doing. Why would we want to transfer that risk to industry? Why would people want to absorb that? So maybe we should pay them a cost plus. We'll ensure they get a reasonable profit, but in return, we're going to control the roadmap and own the risk. And I think that really does make sense for the Cold War era, the prior Cold War. I think it is an impedance mismatch to really getting America's deep capital markets and tech experts on the problems that you have at hand. And I've been really focused in the context of what I've been calling the first breakfast. I view this as sort of the antidote to Bill Perry's Last Supper. How do we explode the industrial base? So not consolidating it down, but how do we bring in tons of new entrants? Well, we need to find faster ways to getting these companies to revenue, getting them to the starting line. We're doing a lot to improve the community at large. We're doing a lot to improve acquisition, improve the number of front doors, the inclusivity. But then there's also a technical component. How do you actually get people to that starting line? How do you start getting them into reps with operational users, into the experiments where they can learn too, where they can see ideas, and then they can put their private capital at risk to build the features they think warfighters need so that we can get more of that market effect going on here.
Yeah, and so I'm going to come right back to that sort of onboarding because there's an interesting sort of contemporary example we can dig into. When we talk about, Titan program and sort of this Cold War mindset, right? I'm an Army guy, so I love to not throw darts at the Army, but I feel like this one has to be thrown, right? When the Army makes an announcement, and I'll caveat this with their trailblazing on like reciprocity and how they're thinking about interoperability. But then their big software modernization play is $1 billion RFI for human services companies to come build, as defined in the RFI, products that already exist, have been commercialized, have been funded by private capital. And literally, if you just walk to the RSA floor, they're all there. How do I reconcile that? Or how should somebody who sees that not see that as a, hey, all of our words are saying one thing, but where we're putting our money is markedly somewhere else?
Yeah, admittedly, it is a little confusing. The way I kind of see it is that, the opposite of one mistake's another mistake. And so much of the software policy is a reaction to bad historical software experiences, feeling locked into specific decisions that have been made in the past. So trying to avoid locking at all costs means that maybe you actually don't get the capability you need. That everything has to be custom, that perfect control comes at the expense of actually the primacy of winning. And so the way I think about it is really the commercial analog. The only place in the US that I find people talking about vendor lock is DoD. The 50% of my business that's commercial, people talk about switching costs. People have standard. I mean, the Google Oracle Supreme Court case says that you can't copyright these API definitions, right? So the API definition becomes how you manage modularity in the modern enterprise. And people are always thinking about, in the context of their architecture, how do all my systems communicate through that API boundary? Now, the government thinks about that in terms of a government-owned reference architecture or GPR rights to those interfaces, which I think they have no matter what. There's actually no configuration based on the court ruling that means you wouldn't own that. And
Yeah.
so I think we need to have more of a focus on demonstrating how these commercial companies can come into an interoperable ecosystem, deliver value, be swapped out, getting closer to something like continuous competition. I think the reality is the commercial markets are completely brutal. I have
Oh
never
yeah.
met a commercial company who wakes up and wants to disrupt themselves, but their competitors wake up and want to disrupt them. So they don't get a vote. And so they have to respond to getting punched in the face every day, which means they go to their vendors and punch them in the face every day saying, give me more to win. And the cycle time for our competitions in the department are, first of all, they're kind of existential. We don't want to wait until we're in a real fight to figure out if we have everything we need here. So we need to create the more diversity of approaches within the department to go exercise this and see, do we have what we actually need? And how do we leverage that R&D to do this? I'll give you a real example that has nothing to do with defense for a second. We built the Operation Warp Speed supply chain in 5 weeks from a complete dead start during a national crisis. But I could only do that in 5 weeks because 2 years earlier, in oil and gas production, I had the original R&D stimulus to build this very sophisticated supply chain digital twin modeling infrastructure to optimize hydrocarbon production. So being able to take in these diverse stimulus from 50 different industries plus government means that the whole nation got to benefit from that. And I think there are countless examples. That is the story of commercial software.
Well, that's also the beauty of, yes, the story of commercial software, but the beauty of transferability, right? I think it's the unshackling this myopic, like high vertical integration view of, okay, I've got this elegant piece of software. It does a thing. It stays here and only does that thing. Whereas if you're taking that horizontal view, there is so much additive and just accretive value that can be derived from a single software solution as it's transferred into different contexts or exposed to data. And that's where, to your point on continuous sort of competition and exposing, maybe reduced barriers or accelerated pathways, I think that's where we start to get at that. And it brings us into, a conversation around the CJAD C2 and how you guys taking that first breakfast are working across the department. You and I have had probably 50 conversations about this, but how do we just find more pathways to bring more software as close as practical so that it can learn, it can be integrated, it can be configured, or it can be found wanting, and we've saved cycles there as well. So can you talk a little bit about, the recent success and sort of what that looks like, why it's got you guys excited?
Yeah, I think first breakfast is meeting its implementation moment. The first moment here is really with Open Dagger, which is part of the CDAO effort under Maven to create and evolve Maven to being a big tent multi-vendor ecosystem. So with a defined set of APIs and a software development kit that makes it very easy for new capabilities to plug into the breadth of the Maven kill chain. So if you're a very promising AI company and you want to work on target nomination, if you can emit targets in this format, it's going to show up inside of this integrated kill chain. On the other end, if you're a company working on target effector pairing, you're going to be able to plug in. And this enables this sort of modularity. It enables different commands to experiment with in the context of guide or even their own exercises, bringing in their own indigenous capabilities. It enables software factories to plug in. So I think the full spectrum of third-party commercial software, first-party green suitor developed capabilities, and arriving at a synthesis of how these things are actually going to play together in combat.
Yeah.
When I look at our experiences in Ukraine, one of the most interesting, I think, socio-cultural observations is that they mobilized, in the beginning, about 100,000 Ukrainians who were, by and large, software engineers or product managers in their day life, in their civilian life, pre-war. And now they're infantrymen. And when you're interacting with them, asking for feature requests, it is at a whole different level of generativity. They know what they're asking for. They know whether this is a 1 hour feature request or a 1 week feature request, and they know how they would translate that into combat power for them. So I think there's huge returns for the department to have this sort of software literacy across the force. It doesn't mean that at the front line, they're sitting there writing code. Maybe they should, maybe they could. Their job is not to develop all the code, but to actually increase the lethality of the force through that collaboration with the entirety of their first-party industrial base. They certainly have great people in Kyiv writing software, but also the vendors that they rely on to deliver this capability.
That's an interesting way to frame that. Was the question I was going to ask coming out of that is, hey, as we look sort of introspectively and increase the software literacy, and we're finding different programs to accelerate sort of new capability injection, insertion, what is the DoD's role? What should it be in this ecosystem? I think there's I'll assume like all positive intent. I think it's absolutely just mission obsessed folks, but there's everything on one side saying, hey, there should be a branch of cyber that is doing stuff that has me asking a whole bunch of questions about like, what is cybercom there for? But you've got, hey, software factories should be building, government owned, government operated. Hey, we should be bringing, tech in, and the primes should be, integrating it. What does that role look like? What do you think kind of optimal looks like there?
I think at the most abstract level, you do want the government to be the product manager in the way that we would use that term in a software company. It's like, I know how I want these things to integrate. I know what my workflow is, and I want to be able to have that opinion and express that and drive my various partners towards delivering that integrated experience for me. I think what can get in the way of that is that's different than being like the head of engineering. And so there are going to be lots of opinions on how you pull that together. And I think that's where you really want to leverage the software supremacy in the US amongst many commercial companies to kind of arrive at that. And so staying focused on the workflow layer, I think, is the most important part, where there's going to be the most differentiation. And I even think the most successful enterprise software really views themselves as building an Iron Man suit around a principle. If it was Operation Warp Speed, you're building infrastructure for General Perna to manage the breadth of the operation. If you're trying to work with warfighters right now, like, you better be wrapping this around the COCOMs and their leadership in order to deliver and maximize lethality. And I think that's one of the things I've really come to appreciate from the Afghan Neo to the present moment, is how much you're actually thinking about every operation as software is a malleable weapon system. You want to wrap around the commander. So that's going to vary by commander. It's going to vary by the operation of the moment. And so we should be measuring, this is the OODA loop that matters. We should be measuring how quickly can we adapt our software to the present moment, not what is this software. And I think we lose, under the trite saying that software is never done, I think we lose the actual thing is like the most valuable software compounds. there's more to do tomorrow than there was today. There's more to do the next day than there was tomorrow. And so if that's true, if your roadmap can only expand when you're doing it right, then you think about the fact that, like, yes, it's probably going to cost you the same amount every year, and you're going to be getting exponentially more as a consequence. And I think maybe one of the hard parts with the department is it doesn't intersect well with how Congress and the department think about their budgeting, which is I want to have some sort of CapEx oriented, big upfront investment that goes away. And I want to be able to meter out what I'm paying based on what capabilities I think I'm going to get. And one of the things that's wildly...
The irony is they say that though, but then you look at, what is it, 40% of the budget is like O&M, tech debt, like keeping a freaking floppy disk system alive in some bat cave somewhere. So I
they back
agree.
themselves
It's
into
stated.
this.
Yeah.
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 Absolutely. I see this with differential. So if we leave the US for a second, we think about if we think about places like Japan and Korea, they actually struggle with software as a service. They also have a CapEx mindset. They tend to be hardware-based economies. They're not excellent at software yet. And of course, I would bet on America every day on that for reasons we've discussed. And I think the CapEx mindset really limits you from being able to capture the value of software, where so much of the value is not articulatable ex ante. Like, you only realize you built something valuable after you built it. This is also why I think it's suitable to transfer the risk to private industry. If you think about how much it takes to get a company to success, you need to factor in the 9 companies that cost just as much to fail. So the amount of leverage on your return here is like, where do you want this to go? And I always feel like we're probably lying to ourselves a little bit, because you don't really see acknowledgement. If 90% of commercial software fails as you're building the company, shouldn't 90% of government software also be acknowledged to fail? But these programs become too big to fail, and they have to keep going. And that seems inauthentic to, the commercial experiences with software.
Yeah, and I think that you get a little bit of legacy of like personnel system and maybe inadvertent yet perverse incentives that you're really incentivized for, just elongated sort of programmatic life cycle. You don't see a bunch of folks, and I mean, Congress doesn't incent this, so this isn't the department. I think the department is sort of the salivating dog in this Pavlovian example, but Congress takes the money away. If you come back to Congress and you're a PO and you're like, I saved $100 million last year, next year I'm going to apply that here, here, and here. They're like, oh, no. You didn't spend it. It's gone. Add that to a NDA and a sort of political current reality where not only do we have that incentive set on those we're telling to modernize, to innovate, to pick winners, we're now giving them their funds 7 months into the year and being like, be creative, be legal, be innovative. You have 5 months to spend $800 billion. Go. And we're shocked that we end up in a do loop of, to go back to $1 billion services contract to go build a bunch of software that already exists, or, having primes that are tremendous at hardware with a ton of hands-on keyboard, again, sub-optimized and not leveraging sort of the broader community. So, I mean, as we're sort of turning the shoe here, turning the loop into the last couple questions, what do you see? I'll start with the pessimist, and then we'll end optimistically. What do you see that concerns you the most about that sort of incentive structure, and how we would need to really like orient the machine to take advantage? Like, what's the one thing that's really, really got your eye?
What I'm really worried about, we have this unique moment where we have over $100 billion of capital that's been deployed in the national interest in defense tech. I view this as a return to an American industrial base. The present moment where you have these pure play defense contractors is the aberration. Chrysler used to make missiles. General Mills, the cereal company, used to make inertial guidance systems for ICBMs. With Ball Aerospace being sold to Collins so that Ball can make aluminum cans, I view that as kind of the end of an era where we had this diversified base. So I think that's important for the reasons we discussed. You learn so much in commercial that drives productivity and innovation that provides national advantage. And I think we are potentially doubling down on this mistake by pushing cost plus as the way of building software. It is the antithesis of the tech business model of getting leverage on your fixed costs, right? And that means we might be turning our back. I think it's a big short on all of these VCs who have invested $100 billion here. We want that capital flowing in the national interest. That's how we're going to build the software slingshot for the near peer competitions that we're currently in every single day. So I think recognizing the way in which cost certainty, cost visibility is actually getting in the way of winning is what I'm most concerned about in the present moment on the pessimistic side.
Yeah. And then I think I told you I'd reserve the right to sort of change the last question. I want to leave I think we went a bunch of really interesting places here. And I think, despite folks who look at me sometimes as a pessimist, I think you and I share the attribute of sort of being eternal optimists for American exceptionalism and what that means for the world. What are you most excited about? And as you look to the future, what should folks wake up and think about as okay, like, we're going to be all right. We got this. Because I think it's easy to look at contracting's broken, the money's not there, the prime's this, the blah, 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 blah. But above all of that, there's plenty to be excited about. So give us your top. What's you excited about?
The companies are here. I'm excited about the founders. I'm excited about the energy. Like, these folks are committed. They're going to win. They are hard-headed. They're going to push through the bureaucracy. Like, we're going to do it as great Americans. Like, they're already in the fight. And so I'm very confident that we're going to win. It doesn't mean the journey is going to be easy, and we're going to have as much to fix inside as we do outside. But I would not bet against this.
I love it. Shyam, every time we talk, I think I'm more fired up than before. So I appreciate you taking some time to come by. I'm grateful for the path that, you and Alex and Doug and the team have laid. I think you can throw a rock without looking at a defense tech company that has followed your guys' story and thought about, what does that mean? How can I learn from it? How can I take it? So appreciate everything you guys have done and are continuing to do, man.
Thank you, brother.
Heck yeah. All right, everybody. Thanks for swinging by. Cheers.